The wind howled through the desolate road as Officer Jake Monroe tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Sheets of rain lashed against the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. The police radio crackled with static, offering only the occasional burst of incoherent chatter. A deep sense of unease settled in his chest. It wasn't just the storm. Tonight felt unnervingly quiet. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the empty stretch of road ahead. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. Just another graveyard shift. But something about the night's silence gnawed at him, like the calm before a storm far worse than the one outside. A flash of movement. A blur of fur. Jake's heart lurched as he slammed the brakes, tires screeching against the slick pavement. His pulse thundered in his ears as he gritted his teeth, the car skidding before jolting to a stop. For a split second, silence returned, heavier than before. He swallowed hard, fingers tightening around the wheel. Had he hit something? Adrenaline spiked as he fumbled for his flashlight, flicking it on with trembling fingers. He leaned forward, peering through the rain-streaked glass. His chest tightened. A dark shape lay motionless in the headlight's glow. He sucked in a breath, forcing himself to move. One way or another he had to know. Jake threw open the car door, stepping into the downpour. Cold rain seeped through his uniform instantly, but he barely noticed. The flashlight beam cut through the night, landing on the figure. A German shepherd, soaked, trembling, but alive. The dog didn't bolt, it didn't snarl, it just stood there, eyes locked onto him. A silent, unflinching gaze. Something about that stare sent a shiver through him, and not from the rain. The dog wasn't just looking at him, it was pleading. A sharp bark broke through the rain, quick and insistent. The dog took a step back, then another, turning slightly but never breaking eye contact. Jake frowned, confusion warring with instinct. Was it hurt? Lost? The shepherd let out another bark, more urgent this time. Then it moved, pacing a few steps forward before stopping again, waiting. Jake's breath hitched. It wasn't running away. It wanted him to follow. His gut twisted. He was a cop, trained to read situations, to assess danger. But this wasn't protocol. This was something else. And against all logic, he found himself stepping forward. Jake hesitated, fingers brushing the radio at his shoulder. Call it in? Wait for backup? Another flash of lightning illuminated the shepherd's soaked fur, the desperation in its stance. It wasn't just standing there. It was leading him somewhere. Damn it, he muttered, pushing the radio away. Ignoring the cold rain seeping into his collar, he took another step, then another. The dog gave a sharp nod, almost human-like, before turning and trotting ahead. Jake followed, his boots splashing against the flooded pavement. He didn't know what he'd find, but somehow, deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The wind howled through the empty street, rattling the trees like skeletal fingers. Jake shut the car door, his mind still occupied with the long drive home. Then he heard it. A sharp, insistent bark cutting through the night. He turned. Standing in the dim glow of a street lamp was a German shepherd, its golden eyes locked onto his. It barked again, its body tense, shifting on its paws as if urging him forward. Jake frowned. He'd seen strays before, but this was different. There was intelligence in its gaze, desperation in its stance. The dog wasn't just lost, it was asking for help. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, stepping forward. The shepherd gave a low whine and took a hesitant step back, waiting. Then, suddenly, it turned and bolted into the night. Jake hesitated for only a second before instinct kicked in. He took off after the shepherd, his boots pounding against the wet pavement. The dog didn't run in panic. It led. Every few steps it glanced back, making sure Jake followed. His heart pounded as he navigated the winding streets, the dog weaving through alleys and empty lots with unsettling precision. "Where are you taking me?" he muttered, dodging puddles and overgrown weeds. The rain thickened, drenching his jacket, but the shepherd never slowed. Then, without warning, it darted into the trees lining the outskirts of town. Jake skidded to a halt, his breath visible in the cold air. A forest. Beyond it, only darkness. A sliver of doubt crept in. Was he making a mistake following a stray into the unknown? The shepherd barked once, urgent. Jake swallowed hard and stepped into the woods. The storm raged above, wind lashing through the trees as Jake stumbled deeper into the woods. Branches clawed at his clothes, the ground slick with mud beneath his feet. Ahead, the shepherd moved like a shadow, silent but determined. Lightning flashed, illuminating the beast for just a moment. Jake caught a glimpse of something raw in its eyes, fear, but not for itself. "What am I walking into?" Jake muttered, pressing forward. The path grew narrow, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. He shivered, the realization dawning on him. He was far from the road now, alone, except for the dog. Then the shepherd stopped abruptly. Its ears pricked, body rigid. Jake strained to see ahead, but darkness swallowed the path. A low whine escaped the shepherd's throat. Something was close. Emerging from the dense thicket, Jake found himself standing before an old, forgotten drainage tunnel beneath an abandoned railway. The tunnel yawned before him, a black void stretching into the unknown. The shepherd whined again, pacing anxiously at the entrance. Its nails scraped against the damp concrete, eyes darting from Jake to the tunnel. Jake's pulse quickened. Whatever was inside, the dog wanted him to see it. A gust of wind sent a shudder through his soaked clothes. He hesitated, scanning the area. The tunnel had been untouched for years. Rusting tracks, graffiti-covered walls, decay creeping over every surface. Yet something felt alive. Taking a deep breath, he pulled his flashlight from his jacket. The shepherd tensed, poised at his side. He clicked the light on and stepped forward. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing slick concrete walls and scattered debris. The smell of dampness and rust filled the air. Then he heard it. A sound so faint, it barely registered over the storm outside. A whispering cry, fragile, broken. Jake froze. His grip tightened on the flashlight. The sound came again, echoing from deep within the tunnel. A child? No, something weaker, something suffering. The shepherd whined, stepping forward. Jake swallowed hard, his breath shallow. Whatever lay ahead, the dog had brought him here for a reason. Steeling himself, he followed the sound into the abyss. Inside the tunnel, the air is thick with dampness and decay. Water drips from the crumbling ceiling, each drop echoing ominously through the darkness. Jake tightens his grip on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom like a fragile lifeline. He moves cautiously, his boots pressing into the cold, unforgiving ground. Beside him, the German shepherd stands firm, ears perked, muscles coiled with quiet intensity. The dog is more than just a companion. He is a sentinel in the abyss, his golden eyes locked onto something unseen. The air shifts, carrying the faintest sound. A whimper. Jake halts, his pulse quickening. The dog lets out a low growl, protective yet restrained. Then, from deeper within the tunnel, the sound sharpens into a muffled cry. The shepherd moves first, leading Jake forward with unwavering certainty. In this darkness, trust is unspoken, yet absolute. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Jake's flashlight flickers, casting jagged shadows along the tunnel walls. The scent of mildew mingles with something else, something raw and human. His breath catches as the beam finally lands on two small figures huddled together in the recess of a broken pipe. Their eyes, wide with fear, reflect the light like mirrors in the dark. A boy and a girl, their thin arms wrapped tightly around each other, bodies curled inward as if to disappear. Jake takes a step closer, his voice low and steady. "Hey there, it's okay, I'm here to help." The children flinch, pressing themselves deeper into the tunnel wall. The boy's grip on his sister tightens, but the German shepherd moves with quiet assurance, stepping forward and lowering his head, his tail still. The boy's gaze flickers between Jake and the dog, uncertainty warring with desperate hope. Jake keeps his hands visible, his heartbeat hammering. They weren't alone in this tunnel. Someone had left them here. The children's frail bodies tell a silent story of hardship. Their cheeks are hollow, their clothes mere rags draped over fragile frames. The girl, barely more than 5, clings to her brother's arm, her small fingers digging into the fabric. The boy, perhaps 8, stares at Jake, his chest rising and falling in quick, panicked breaths. His lips tremble, but he doesn't speak. Instead, his free hand curls into the thick fur of the German shepherd beside him, seeking warmth, safety, anything but the cold void that has surrounded them for so long. Jake swallows hard. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." The shepherd nudges the girl's hand gently, an unspoken reassurance. Slowly, the boy relaxes, though his eyes never leave the shadows behind Jake. He isn't just scared of Jake. He's scared of something, or someone, still lurking in the tunnel. Jake kneels, careful to keep his movements slow, non-threatening. The last thing he wants is to startle them into running deeper into the tunnel. "I'm Jake," he says softly, his voice barely louder than the distant dripping water. "This is Shadow. He's a good dog." The boy's fingers tighten in the shepherd's fur, his knuckles white. He studies Jake with wary eyes, searching for deceit. The girl remains still, her breath hitching with every slight noise echoing in the tunnel. The boy licks his chapped lips but doesn't speak. Jake risks a small step forward. "You're not alone anymore, I promise. We're here to help." The boy glances at his sister, then at the tunnel's dark maw behind Jake. Is he gone?" the boy whispers, voice hoarse. Jake's stomach knots. "Who?" he asks carefully. The boy's eyes darted past him. "The man." The German shepherd moves first. Shadow lowers his head, pressing his warm muzzle into the boy's hand. It's a small instinctive gesture, but it breaks the tension. The boy exhales, his small fingers wrapping fully around Shadow's fur, grounding himself in the presence of something pure and safe. The girl watches, hesitant before slowly reaching out as well. Shadow stays perfectly still, offering his presence without demand. Jake observes in silence, knowing the bond forming in front of him is built on something deeper than words. The dog wasn't just a guardian, he was their bridge back to trust. The boy meets Jake's gaze, something shifting behind his eyes. He still doesn't fully trust Jake, but he trusts the dog, and that was enough for now. The moment is fragile, but just as hope begins to settle, a noise cuts through the air. A faint, deliberate shuffle from deeper in the tunnel. Jake's hands shake as he reaches for his radio. Static crackles before he forces out the words. "I found them. 2 kids, alive. But there's someone else here, requesting immediate backup." The boy stiffens, clutching Shadow tighter. His eyes darted to the darkness behind Jake, his breath shallow and quick. "We have to go," Jake urges. "Come on, I'll take you somewhere safe." The girl hesitates, glancing toward the unseen depths of the tunnel. "He'll come back," she whispers. Shadow lets out a low growl, his body tense, head turned toward the darkness. Jake swallows. "Not if I can help it." But before he can move, a slow, deliberate step echoes from the tunnel's depths. Not an accident, not an animal. Someone is there, watching. Jake turns sharply, his flashlight trembling as he directs it toward the tunnel's darkness. The beam barely reaches, swallowed by the abyss beyond. Shadow's growl deepens, his body a barrier between Jake and the children. The boy and girl shrink behind him, their fear palpable. Then, another step. Closer. A silhouette shifts just outside the light's reach, too large for a child, too deliberate for an accident. Jake's pulse pounds in his ears. He doesn't know who, or what, is lurking in the shadows, but he knows one thing: they aren't alone. And whoever left these children here is still watching. The German shepherd's ears snapped forward, its entire body tense. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from its chest, reverberating through the cold tunnel walls. Jake stiffened, his breath forming misty clouds in the dim light. Something was lurking ahead, beyond the flickering remnants of daylight at the tunnel's entrance. The dog, always protective, stepped forward, bracing itself between Jake and the unknown danger ahead. He tightened his grip on the children's hands, his pulse quickening. Whatever was out there, it was close. A faint rustling echoed through the tunnel, barely audible at first. Jake strained his ears. The sound grew louder, turning into slow, deliberate footsteps. He swallowed hard, glancing at the children huddled beside him. Their frightened eyes darted between him and the tunnel's darkness. The German shepherd let out another warning growl, stepping forward cautiously. Something, or someone, was coming. From the darkness, a hooded figure emerged, moving with an eerie stillness. His gaunt face was barely visible under the dim light, but his hollow eyes locked onto them with an unsettling intensity. Jake felt the weight of the moment sink in, every muscle in his body tensing. The stranger's presence sent an icy dread crawling up his spine. Jake instinctively stepped in front of the children, his body shielding them. His fingers inched toward his holster, his movements slow and deliberate. The German shepherd stood rigid, its stance ready for battle, lips curled in a silent snarl. Jake didn't know if the man was armed, but he wasn't about to take any chances. The children clung to each other, their breath hitching with fear. The stranger tilted his head slightly, his voice eerily flat. "You shouldn't have come here," he murmured. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The tunnel had been their only escape route from the wrecked highway. He hadn't expected to find something, or someone, lurking within it. The German shepherd let out a sharp bark, sensing the tension in the air. The stranger took a step closer, his presence suffocating. Without warning, the stranger lunged. Jake barely had time to react before the German shepherd sprang forward, teeth bared. The dog's powerful form collided with the man, knocking him off balance. The struggle was immediate, a blur of movement, the sound of grunts, and the snarling of an animal fighting to protect its own. Jake reached for his weapon, his mind racing. The children screamed as the fight unfolded before them. The tunnel became a battlefield of shadows and echoes. The German shepherd, fierce and relentless, snapped and lunged, forcing the attacker to stumble. Jake seized the moment, using his weight to tackle the man, struggling to pin him down. The sound of fists connecting, the man's strangled shouts and the dog's growls filled the enclosed space. A sharp pain flared in Jake's arm, but he ignored it, focusing only on stopping the threat. Just as the fight seemed to reach its breaking point, a distant sound cut through the chaos. Sirens. The piercing wail of approaching rescue vehicles sent a wave of relief crashing over Jake. The stranger's struggles weakened as he realized his escape was impossible. Jake managed to wrench the man's arm behind his back, pinning him against the cold ground. The German shepherd stood beside him, panting heavily but unwavering. As the flashing red and blue lights finally reached the tunnel's entrance, the children collapsed beside the German shepherd, wrapping their small arms around its sturdy frame. Tears streamed down their faces, but they clung to their silent protector, the dog who had never abandoned them. Jake exhaled a shaky breath, reaching out to stroke the shepherd's fur. "You saved us, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The bond between them had been tested, but it had only grown stronger. As the authorities secured the scene and led the children to safety, Jake realized something deep within him had changed. This wasn't just a dog. This was a guardian, a companion, a lifeline. And in that moment he knew he would never leave the German shepherd's side. Not now, not ever. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the cold pavement as officers led the man away in handcuffs. The children, wrapped in warm blankets, clung to the paramedics, their wide eyes filled with exhaustion and relief. The truth had finally come to light. They had been missing for weeks, hidden away in the dark corners of a nightmare. As the world took a breath, one silent hero stood in the shadows, watching as the chaos settled. The German shepherd had done his part. But what now? The media called him a hero. The townspeople admired his bravery. But once the headlines faded, reality set in. He had no collar, no owner, and nowhere to go. The shelter took him in, praising his courage, but to him it was just another cage. The cold metal bars didn't feel much different from the streets he once roamed. His mission was complete, but he had been left behind, forgotten in the aftermath. Jake stood at the entrance of the shelter, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. The dog sat behind the bars, watching him with quiet patience. Those deep brown eyes spoke louder than words. They weren't pleading, weren't begging, just waiting. A silent question lingered between them. Jake had been part of the rescue, but he hadn't expected this. He wasn't looking for a dog. Yet, as he turned to leave, something in his chest tightened. Could he really walk away? Jake exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. He had never been impulsive. But before he could second-guess himself, he was signing the adoption papers. He didn't understand it fully, but something about this dog felt different. Fate, maybe. The shelter worker smiled as she handed him the leash. "He needs a name," she said. Jake glanced down at the shepherd, whose eyes never left his. "Hero," he murmured. It felt right. The front door creaked open, and Hero stepped inside. The house was warm, a stark contrast to the cold streets he had known. Yet he hesitated. His paws lingered on the threshold, his ears flicking back, uncertainty in his stance. Jake watched from the kitchen, heart clenched at the sight. "You can come in," he said softly. Hero took one cautious step, then another. But even as he moved forward, he stayed close to the door, as if unsure he belonged. Jake knelt beside Hero, his voice gentle. "You saved them," he whispered, running a hand through the thick fur. "Let me save you." The shepherd didn't move at first, but something in Jake's voice, earnest, unwavering, eased the tension in his body. For the first time, the hero didn't flinch at a human's touch. He simply leaned in just a little. That night, Hero curled up beside Jake's couch, his body finally still. No more streets, no more cages, no more uncertainty, just warmth, just home. Jake exhaled, running a tired hand over his face before glancing down. "Looks like we both needed saving," he murmured. Hero let out a soft sigh, his tail giving a small thump against the floor. They had found what they were missing: each other. The night was bitter, the wind howling through the skeletal trees as Jake sat on his porch, staring at the empty road ahead. He never imagined that the hero he needed would arrive on 4 legs, drenched in rain, shivering from the cold. But fate had a way of rewriting expectations. The moment their eyes met, he knew. This was no ordinary encounter. This was destiny in motion. She had once been discarded, left to fend for herself against the unforgiving world. The German shepherd bore the scars of a past filled with neglect. Yet within her, a relentless spirit refused to break. When the fire spread through the woods that night, threatening Jake's cabin, she didn't hesitate. Through smoke and chaos, she barked, clawed, and guided him to safety, proving that loyalty is not given, it is earned through trust and love. Jake never sought companionship, let alone from a stray dog. But as he wrapped the blanket around her trembling body, feeling her heartbeat slow against his chest, something shifted. In her eyes, he saw more than gratitude. He saw a mirror to his own solitude. The bond was unspoken yet undeniable. He saved her from the storm. She saved him from loneliness. Some say fate works in strange ways. For Jake, it arrived in the form of a German shepherd who had lost everything, only to find him. What were the odds that on the very night he needed saving, she would be the one to come? Perhaps life's greatest gifts are hidden in the most unexpected moments, wrapped in fur and bound by silent understanding. As the days turned to months, Jake realized the truth. He wasn't just the one who had saved her. She had rescued him in ways he never anticipated. Through her unwavering presence, she taught him what it meant to trust again, to love without fear. Some heroes wear badges, others have paws, and sometimes the ones we save end up saving us too.